Welcome to another deep dive, and today we're tackling one of philosophy's most challenging works,
Yeah.
Spinoza's Ethics. But we're not just reading the book straight through, you know?
Right.
Our source material is actually an academic text that analyzes the ethics, and get this, it's in Spanish.
Oh, wow.
So we're really going deep here.
I like it.
It gets into all the details, you know, how the book was written and published, and of course all those mind-bending philosophical arguments that Spinoza is famous for.
Yeah, his arguments can be a bit of a maze.
A maze is a good word for it.
But that's why we're here, right? To help our listeners find their way through it.
Think of us as your guides to understanding this complex masterpiece.
I like that analogy.
So to kick things off, one of the first things that struck me about the source material was the fact that the Ethics wasn't actually published while Spinoza was alive.
Oh, that's right. It was only released after his death by his friends.
Yeah, imagine that, you know, this incredibly influential book almost didn't see the light of day.
It really makes you wonder how many other brilliant ideas might be out there just waiting to be discovered.
Oh, for sure. But getting back to the Ethics, you know, one of the things that makes it so unique is that it's deeply rooted in rationality. Spinoza ties ethics to metaphysics and physics, which is a pretty different approach from how many people view ethics today.
Yeah, it's almost like he's saying there's a kind of science to being a good person.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about following rules or traditions, but understanding the fundamental nature of reality and how we fit into it.
Exactly. And that leads us to one of the most controversial aspects of Spinoza's philosophy.
Yeah.
His belief in a deterministic universe.
Determinism, right? So the idea that everything is predetermined.
So if everything is already set in stone, does that mean we don't really have free will?
That's the big question, right? If our choices don't really matter, then how can we be held accountable for our actions?
It seems like Spinoza is saying that ethics is meaningless in a deterministic universe.
Right. It's a tough pill to swallow. But hold on. Our source explains that Spinoza actually flips this idea on its head.
Really?
He argues that true freedom comes from understanding and accepting this very necessity.
So instead of seeing determinism as a limitation, he sees it as the key to liberation.
Exactly. It's a pretty radical idea, and it leads us to one of Spinoza's most challenging concepts, substance.
Substance. Yes. He claims there's only one substance, which is God, and everything else is just a modification of it.
Okay, now we're getting into the really deep stuff. So everything we see and experience the entire universe is just a part of God.
That's how Spinoza saw it. And this might seem like a very abstract idea, but it has some profound implications.
Like what?
Well, for one, it means that everything is interconnected. We are all part of this grand unified reality.
Wow. Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going. But the idea of everything being a modification of God feels a bit like mental gymnastics to me.
I can understand that it's not an easy concept to grasp, and there were definitely critics of Spinoza's idea of substance even back then.
Our source material mentions some of them, right?
It did. One common criticism is, how can physical things like, bodies be a part of God's essence?
Right, because God is usually conceived of as being spiritual and indivisible.
Yeah, so how can something that's physical and divisible, like a body, be a part of that?
Good question.
Well, Spinoza had some pretty clever counter-arguments.
Like what?
He used the example of a triangle. You can't have a triangle without its attributes. 3 sides, angles adding up to 180 degrees and so on.
Right.
For Spinoza, substance is similar. Its attributes are inseparable from its being. Therefore, there can only be one substance.
So it's like saying there can't be multiple kinds of fundamental reality.
Precisely. And as for the issue of physical things being part of God, he argued that our limited perception deceives us. We see division where there's actually only unity.
That's a pretty deep thought.
He used the example of dividing water. You can divide it into drops, but it's still fundamentally water. So while we might perceive things as separate and divisible, Spinoza argues that our intellect, when properly trained, can grasp the true unified nature of reality.
It's all connected. It's a lot to take in.
It is, but it's a pretty amazing idea when you think about it.
Definitely. And this idea of a unified substance directly influences how Spinoza views the soul, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He doesn't see it as some separate ethereal thing floating around. It's intimately connected to the body. In fact, he called the soul the idea of the body. Meaning it's our mind's awareness of our physical existence.
So our mind and body aren't two separate entities battling it out. They're intertwined aspects of this one substance.
Exactly. And for Spinoza, the soul gains knowledge through ideas which he categorized as either adequate or inadequate.
Adequate versus inadequate, what's the difference?
Adequate ideas are clear true representations of reality grasped through reason.
Okay.
Inadequate ideas are fuzzy, based on sensory experience or imagination.
So it's like the difference between knowing something for sure versus just having a hunch.
That's a good way to put it. Think of it this way. Your senses can trick you, but your reason, when used correctly, leads to genuine knowledge.
It's like he's saying we can't always trust our gut feelings or what we see at face value.
Right.
We need to engage our critical thinking skills to really understand the world.
Exactly. That's the power of reason, according to Spinoza.
But if our mind is so tied to our physical body, how does Spinoza explain what happens after death?
That's a fascinating question, and one that Spinoza tackles head-on. While he acknowledges that our memories and imagination tied to our physical body fade away, he argues there's a part of the soul that endures.
Wait, so even though the soul's connected to the body, there's a part that's eternal?
That's where things get really interesting. But maybe we can save that discussion for later and delve into Spinoza's ideas about knowledge and the 3 different ways we can access it.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. This is definitely a deep dive, but it's incredibly thought-provoking. I'm ready to explore more.
Me too. This is fascinating stuff.
Okay, so we've talked about how Spinoza had this really unique perspective on the soul. You know how it's connected to the body?
Yeah, very different from traditional views.
And now our source material kind of dives into his ideas about knowledge. And specifically, he talks about 3 different ways of knowing imagination, reason, and intuition.
These are like different levels of understanding, almost like, steps on a ladder.
I like that analogy.
At the bottom rung, you have imagination, which is where we rely on sensory data and form those inadequate ideas we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, imagination is where we get tricked by appearances, right? Like thinking the earth is flat because it looks that way.
Exactly. Our senses can be deceiving, and imagination is where those illusions and misunderstandings can really take root.
Makes sense. So then above imagination, what do we have?
We have reason.
Yeah.
This is where we use our logic and our ability to kind of deduce things and grasp those, general concepts and make connections between things.
So through reason, we can move beyond just observing the world around us. We start to understand the why behind it all.
Precisely, reason helps us see beneath the surface level and grasp the underlying structure of reality.
Okay, that makes sense. But then Spinoza says there's an even higher level of knowing.
Right.
This thing called intuition.
Intuition, that's the peak of the mountain, so to speak.
What exactly is intuition, though? It sounds kind of mysterious.
Well, it's where we have this direct, immediate understanding of the essence of things. Almost like a flash of insight that transcends the limits of our senses and even reason.
Oh, wow. So it's not something you can just learn from a textbook or by thinking really hard about something.
Sure, exactly. It's more about a direct experience of truth, a deep intuitive grasp of reality that comes from, a lot of intellectual and ethical development.
That sounds pretty amazing, actually.
Yeah.
But was this something that Spinoza believed everyone could achieve, or was it just for like a select few super enlightened individual? He believed everyone could reach this level of understanding. He saw it as the ultimate goal of knowledge, a state where we connect directly with the essence of reality and understand our place within it.
Okay, so we move from the illusions of imagination to the logic of reason and ultimately to this profound understanding of intuition.
That's the journey.
But how does this all tie back to Spinoza's concept of the soul and how it's connected to the body?
Well, remember, he believed that the soul is the idea of the body, right? It's our mind's awareness of our physical existence. So as we refine our knowledge, as we move towards those more and more adequate ideas, our soul becomes more aligned with the true nature of reality.
It's like we're kind of purifying our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Exactly. And this purification, this alignment, is what leads to genuine freedom and happiness, according to Spinoza.
So it's not about denying the body or trying to escape from it. It's about understanding it and its place in the grand scheme of things.
That's a core part of Spinoza's philosophy. This is really fascinating stuff. Now, our source material goes on to discuss another crucial aspect of Spinoza's ethics. His analysis of emotions, what he called affects.
Affects, yeah, those feelings that we all experience.
Right, and Spinoza had a pretty unique perspective on them, didn't he?
He did. He saw emotions as being tied to our body's power of acting, or in other words, our ability to, affect the world around us and be affected by it.
Okay, so it's not just about feeling happy or sad. It's about how those emotions reflect our relationship with the world and our ability to actually do things within it.
Precisely. And he went even further, identifying 3 primary effects.
Yeah.
Joy, sadness, and desire.
Joy, sadness, desire. Okay, so what do those represent?
Joy signifies an increase in our power of acting sadness, a decrease. And desire is the striving to, maintain or enhance our power.
Interesting. So these emotions are like indicators of how we're doing in terms of our ability to engage with the world.
That's how Spinoza saw it.
Yeah.
And he didn't stop there. He went on to analyze specific emotions like love, hate, envy, hope, you name it.
And he connected them all back to those three primary effects.
Right, showing how each emotion reflects a change in our power of acting, either an increase or a decrease.
So like love would be joy associated with some external cause.
Exactly. And hate would be sadness associated with an external cause.
That's a really interesting way to break down emotions into their basic components.
Yeah.
But what about those times when we feel emotions without a clear reason? Like we just suddenly feel happy or sad for no apparent reason.
Spinoza recognized that too, and he attributed it to what he called sympathy and antipathy.
Sympathy and antipathy, what are those?
They're like forces of attraction and repulsion that operate on a deeper level, often below our conscious awareness.
So they're like unconscious biases that influence our emotional reactions.
Yeah, you could say that. And Spinoza also recognized the powerful influence of imagination and association on our emotions.
Which is super relevant today, right? Especially with things like social media, where we're constantly bombarded with images and information that's designed to trigger specific emotions.
Exactly. Spinoza was way ahead of his time in recognizing how easily our emotions can be manipulated by external factors.
So it's like we're not always in control of our feelings as much as we might think.
Right. But Spinoza didn't see this as a reason to despair. He believed that by understanding the mechanisms of our emotions, we could gain more control over them.
It's about becoming more emotionally intelligent.
Exactly. It's not about denying our feelings, but about understanding where they come from and how they impact our actions.
And this leads us back to the importance of reason, right?
Absolutely. Spinoza believed that by cultivating our reason, we could better understand our emotions and manage them more effectively, leading to greater freedom and happiness.
So it's not just about thinking logically, it's about using reason to guide our emotions towards more constructive ends.
That's the key. And for Spinoza, understanding the natural order of things and our place within it leads to a kind of peace of mind that allows us to, act more ethically and live more fulfilling lives.
It sounds like he's saying that true freedom comes not from having unlimited choices, but from understanding the limitations of our situation and making choices that align with the reality of things.
That's a great way to put it.
And that reminds me, we were talking earlier about what happens to the soul after death.
Right, we left that question hanging.
Yeah, I'm still curious about how Spinoza reconciled the soul's connection to the body with this idea of an eternal aspect of the soul.
Okay, well, let's pick up that thread and see where it leads us.
All right, so we've explored like all these different facets of Spinoza's thought, the soul, knowledge, emotions, even death.
It's a lot to take in.
It is, but now I'm really curious about how he takes these ideas and applies them to society as a whole.
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting.
Because it's one thing to talk about individual enlightenment, but how do these ideas play out in like the real world,
Right, where people have different desires and they clash and there's conflict. Well, this is where Spinoza's political philosophy comes into play. Our source explains that he made a distinction between what he called the natural state and the civil state.
Okay, the natural state versus the civil state. I'm intrigued.
So in the natural state, individuals are basically driven by self-preservation, and there's this constant struggle for power.
So it's like everyone for themselves.
Pretty much.
Yes.
It's like a philosophical version of survival of the fittest.
I can see how that would be pretty chaotic.
Exactly. And Spinoza recognized that this kind of unchecked individualism could lead to a lot of conflict and instability.
So how do we get out of that mess?
That's where the civil state comes in.
Okay.
It's based on this idea of a social contract where individuals agree to give up some of their absolute freedom in exchange for the security and stability that comes with living under common laws and having a government and all that.
So it's like a trade-off, right?
Yeah.
You give up a little bit of your freedom to get a little bit of peace and security.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between individual liberty and the common good.
It sounds like he's trying to create a system for a more just and equitable society.
He was definitely concerned with issues of justice and fairness.
And within this framework, our source explains how he saw concepts like justice and injustice, sin and merit as social constructs.
Right, not some kind of absolute inherent qualities.
So they're like products of the agreements and laws that govern a particular society.
Exactly. What's considered right or wrong can vary depending on the context, the culture, the time period.
It makes you realize that morality isn't always so black and white.
And Spinoza was also very aware of the potential for abuse of power.
Oh, yeah, definitely, especially within a system like that.
He was a strong advocate for freedom of thought and expression.
Even though he believed in a deterministic universe.
Right, because he saw those freedoms as essential for a healthy society.
You know, it's amazing how relevant his ideas still are today.
I know, right? We're still grappling with the same basic questions about individual freedom, social responsibility, the role of government.
And Spinoza's insights can offer a valuable framework for thinking about these complex issues.
Definitely. Now, going back to what you were saying earlier about individual enlightenment,
Yeah.
it's important to remember that Spinoza's ethics wasn't just about creating a better society.
Right. It was about understanding our place in the universe and how we can achieve true happiness.
Exactly. He believed that the ultimate good was knowledge of God.
Which for Spinoza was a bit different than the traditional religious view, right?
Definitely. For him, it wasn't about worshiping a deity. It was about understanding the interconnectedness of everything.
It's like that idea of substance again, everything being part of one unified whole.
Exactly. And this knowledge, this understanding, leads to freedom and joy because it allows us to see ourselves as part of something much greater than ourselves.
It's like a sense of belonging to something bigger.
And that brings us back to Spinoza's idea about the soul enduring after death.
Oh, right.
The part that's grounded in true understanding, the part that comes from reason and intuition, that's what persists.
So it's like our grasp of truth, our knowledge of reality that transcends our physical limitations.
Exactly. It's a powerful concept, and it really emphasizes the importance of pursuing knowledge and living a life guided by reason.
Yeah, it's like what we learn and understand about the world has this lasting value.
Yeah.
It shapes who we are, and in a way it lives on even after we're gone.
Beautifully said. While some aspects of Spinoza's philosophy might seem a bit outdated now, his core ideas are incredibly relevant.
I agree. His emphasis on reason, the interconnectedness of all things, the pursuit of knowledge, those are timeless themes.
They really are, and they provide a really valuable framework for navigating the complexities of life and finding meaning in a world that can often feel pretty chaotic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I'm really struck by how Spinoza's Ethics is more than just a philosophical text.
It's a guide to life.
Yeah, it's like a guide to living more meaningful and fulfilling life. It challenges us to question our assumptions, to cultivate our reason, and to strive for this deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's a journey of learning and discovery, and it never really ends.
That's for sure. There's always more to explore, more to think about, more to learn.
And for our listeners who are feeling inspired to learn more, remember there's a whole world of philosophical inquiry out there.
Just waiting to be discovered.
Whether you dive deeper into Spinoza or explore other thinkers, the important thing is to keep asking those big questions and stay curious.
Absolutely. Keep those minds engaged and those hearts open to the beauty of knowledge.
That's what it's all about.
Well said. Until next time, keep on learning, everyone.